Okay. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today for the FVPSA pre-application webinar. Today is October 6th, 2023, and this presentation is going to be conducted by myself, Carla Delgado. I'm the Management Analyst 4 for the Victim Services Grants Management Unit here in Carson City, and Elena Espinoza, she is our Social Services Specialist 3 in Las Vegas. Some of the items that we're going to cover today are in regards to what is FVPSA, the eligibility requirements for anyone who wants to apply for this funding, allowable and unallowable costs, the application process and the materials that need to be turned in with the application, the timeline from application to award notification, and then after awards have been after subgrants have been awarded, then the compliance piece, what's required for the FVPSA grant. So what is FVPSA? The Family Violence Prevention and Services Act is federal funding that supports life-saving services for victims of domestic violence and their children and dependents. It was first authorized in 1984, and it's administered by the Department of Health and Human Services. FVPSA is the only federal funding source dedicated to domestic violence shelters and programs. It also supports over 1,600 local domestic violence programs who rely on FVPSA to keep their doors open to more than 1.4 million victims seeking safety each year. Some of the covered services include, but are not limited to, shelters, safety planning, information and referral, legal advocacy, and other additional supports and services related to the assistance of crisis hotlines, counseling, and programs for underserved communities throughout the U.S., American Indian, and Alaska Native communities and territories. So now let's talk about FVPSA in Nevada. So the role of the Division of Child and Family Services is we're the state administering agency for the FVPSA grant. And we administer funding to subrecipients in Nevada. The other piece is that we're responsible for ensuring that subrecipients meet eligibility and organizational requirements, that we are also following federal and state quality and compliance standards, as well as ensuring that we're tracking and reporting and following the rules and regulations. This year, Nevada has received $1.5 million in total funding for the FVPSA grant. This is going to be split between two funding distributions, which include 74% for immediate shelter and supportive services, and 26% of the total award for supportive services and prevention services. One little caveat is that funding preference will be given to direct service work being done with culturally specific populations and underserved populations.
And now let's talk a little bit about the eligibility pieces. Any nonprofit organization, faith-based organization, or federally recognized tribal nation that provides shelter, supportive services, or prevention services to adults and youth victims of family violence, which encompasses domestic violence or dating violence and their children and dependents. This agency must have an active, unique entity identifier that may be gained from the sam.gov site, must be able to comply with civil rights regulations, and be able to provide meaningful access for services for limited English proficient persons. More information at www.lep.gov. And then be able to maintain confidentiality as is required by law. Also, do not charge victims for FVPSA related or FVPSA funded services. and must be able to meet the program match requirements. Also, these agencies, organizations must also have a record of effective delivery of services for victims of domestic violence and their children dependents. Now let's talk a little bit about allowable costs and unallowable costs. And also there is a section towards the end of our presentation where we will entertain frequently asked questions, and then we can have a larger conversation if any questions arise. So essentially, we've also attached the federal guideline around sort of the allowable costs for FVPSA. And essentially, it is to support the operation and administration of shelter and supportive services, including but not limited to staffing, shelter-specific operations, and this you will see that food, because it tends to come up as a question around allowable costs, that food within the shelter-specific operations is allowed in the following scenarios: food and toiletries for shelter, rental costs of the shelter facility, supplies for the shelter, including supplies for survivors that are newly entering the shelter. Also, allowable cost does include some pieces around transportation, the development of safety plans, as well as individual and group counseling and peer support groups. Additionally, FVPSA funds are allowed to cover training, technical assistance, prevention and outreach to increase awareness of domestic violence and dating violence, with some limitations. The provision of culturally and linguistically appropriate services, services for children exposed to domestic violence as primary victims, advocacy, case management, and information and referral services. And to touch on the first bullet, prevention services, including outreach to underserved populations, is also an allowable cost. Now let's move on to unallowable, right? And some of you might already be familiar with this list. No lobbying. We have to understand that the primary focus of FVPSA is domestic violence and services to victims and their children. And so sexual assault specific programming outside of intimate partner sexual violence is unallowable. FVPSA does not allow direct payments to victims to their or their children or dependents. Any emergency service or shelter that requires compliance with certain conditions in order to be received or provided. Charging fees to victims, I mentioned this earlier, charging fees to victims receiving FVPSA funded services. Providing services or training exclusively on types of abuse or assault outside of DV and outside of DV and within the conversation of intimate partners. And then there is no reimbursement for medical or healthcare services for FVPSA. We're going to transition ever so gently in the direction of the application materials and process. If anybody on the call needs editable versions of the application or the attachments, please feel free to reach out via this email and we can get that to you. Other than that, all this information is posted on our website. And so we have an application checklist to help guide all the pieces that we need to submit. This does not need to be submitted, however, that's just for the internal processes and agency. The sections of the application are the following. Section A is the application form, where we gather larger data and information around the agency applying and their focus in this application. Section B is the proposal narrative. We want to know what you have in mind to develop in terms of programming. Section 3, the budget, which itself is composed of 3 components, and that is the narrative, the summary, and the match. Section D is an agency self-assessment. There is no scoring on this. We just would like for all applicants to complete that as well. And Section E is any past performance with DCFS GMU. And then last but not least, we have the attachment, also called the scope of work, SOW, and that is where you can share with us your goals and objectives and do a deeper dive into the performance metrics for your program proposal. After all of this is completed, which is the deadline on 11/2 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, please feel free to email it to nvictimservices@dcfs.nv.gov. We wanted to review with everybody the timeline that we have set forth. We did announce, the grant opportunity was announced on October 2nd. What we are doing is via this webinar, as well as any questions that are submitted via our Nevada NV Victim Services email, we will gather all the Q&As and we will post them by the end of next week. So we've adjusted this date a little ever so slightly. So a Q&A posting made public on our website will be done by next Friday at the latest. And so here we go. Like I said, we adjusted that piece. The deadline for submission, it is 30 days for applicants to complete the applications. And so it is November 2nd, 2023. The evaluation period, where the evaluation committee, we will discuss and meet and do the rubric and the scoring, will take place between November 3rd, all the month of November, taking into account some holidays in between. The announcement of awards will be in the month of December 2023, and then the performance period for this FVPSA opportunity extends from October 1st, 2023 through next year, September 30th, 2024. And so just to give you a sense of, in the spirit of transparency, the application review process, that funding decisions will be based on the following factors: review panel scores, geographic distribution of the proposed grant awards, federal priority funding populations, and conflicts or redundancy with other funded programs or supplanting of existing funding. Those are the main 4 points of review.
Okay, thank you, Elena.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'll go into some frequently asked questions about the FVPSA grant. So the first question is, can FVPSA recipients purchase food with the FVPSA grant funds? So as Elena mentioned earlier, this is a yes. The grant recipients are allowed to purchase food with federal funds in certain instances. The general rule that the cost must be reasonable and necessary for carrying out the grant is always required. Paying for food for staff meetings is not allowable and is not considered as necessary for carrying out the grant requirements, since staff are expected to meet their own food needs. However, purchasing food for a community event, a survivor support group, or a children's event is allowable. If you are awarded the grant and have any questions about allowables and disallowables, our team is here to assist you with those questions. And we staff anything that comes through and ensure that we get you the correct responses.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 2, can FVPSA grant recipients use FVPSA grant funds to purchase food for a conference or training? This one is also a yes. So 45 CFR 75.432 states that costs of meals and refreshments and other incidentals paid by the non-federal entity as a sponsor or host of a conference is allowable unless further restricted by the terms and conditions of the federal award. A conference is defined as a meeting, retreat, seminar, symposium, workshop, or event whose primary purpose is the dissemination of technical information beyond the non-federal entity and is necessary and reasonable for the successful performance under the federal award. Question 3. Are prevention and awareness activities funded under FVPSA? So this is a yes, but with limitations. The primary focus of the FVPSA program is the provision of services to victims of domestic violence and their children. As such, the following are unallowable. And Elena went through this, so I'll just touch on the points again, but sexual assault programming, and providing services or trainings exclusively on the types of abuse or assault outside of a domestic violence incident between intimate partners and their dependents.
Yeah.
Question 4. Can FVPSA subrecipients use FVPSA funds to make minor renovations? So again, this one is a yes. And grant recipients can use FVPSA funds for minor renovations or alternations. Alterations?
Alterations. Sorry.
Alterations to ensure that domestic violence shelters and programs meet state and local shelter standards, including applicable health and safety requirements. And this one must be received by our unit for prior approval. So please just let us know if your agency is thinking about having any renovations or alterations that may be required for the shelter, and we can review that. And then our last question is, does FVPSA funds cover maintenance and repairs? So these costs are allowable to FVPSA grant funded programs and do not require prior approval. So these are okay. And now we want to know if anybody who's on the webinar today has any specific questions about the NOFO, FVPSA itself, or anything else that we can answer for you. So Nevada Urban Indians.
This is Kalina Ponce. How are you guys doing today? My main question that I had after reading everything, under the collaboration section, I just want to confirm we do not need to go in with another agency to write this grant, correct? We can do our normal collaborations like we do with our memorandums of understanding?
Yes, that is correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Does anyone else have a question? You can also feel free to add questions to the chat of the Teams meeting as well. Okay, and I see one in the chat now. So it says, I know that sexual assault services are not allowable. Is there a specific way a dual agency would report this? Elena, do you know?
Yes, as long as the primary agency is DV focused or dating violence, or that falls under that. The secondary or the partner agency may do SA, but the primary has to primary focus on DV. Does that answer your question?
This is Christina. I just wanted to clarify, we're a dual agency that does both sexual assault and domestic and dating violence. So do we need to like separate it out for reporting and to show that we are like, is there a possible way to make that work or that you're looking for?
That's fine, because you also, in your dual focus, you do focus on set aside DV programming, correct? Or they're all intertwined through all the program?
Yeah, our advocacy program, our case management and healing programs are all available to all clients.
Okay.
So
let me ask our program officer and get back to you regarding programming on that piece, Christina. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely. Thanks so much,
Okay.
Elena.
Thank you. And we'll also post the response as well on our website. Thank you.
We received another question from Matthew. Are there any required activities for this grant?
They can be direct victim services type of programming activities, or they can also be prevention and awareness type of activities, as long as the primary focus is on domestic violence. Does that answer your question? That would really be up to each of the agencies and what their program plan is. As long as it's focused on victim survivors and their children within a DV space. Did that answer your question, Matthew?
And I'm not sure, it shows that, oh, he said thank you. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any additional questions? Let's see. Sandy at Tu Casa Latina. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Elena, could you
Yes.
go to your first slide when you first started? I heard something, you mentioned a timeline in reporting. And because we do the U visas, it's hard for us to present an end product because the process takes 6 to 7 years. So we report what we have, but is that still going to be acceptable?
It is acceptable. We understand that some programs might not be at full closeout programmatically, and that's what happens with a lot of legal access and legal advocacy services. So that's okay, Sandy. As long as you can show, as long as the agencies can show programmatic movement forward in their programs, we're just looking for that activity piece. But no, you do not need to have closed it and be done with it by the close of the performance. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And I see the hand is still up for Nevada Urban Indians, but I'm not sure if you have another question.
Sorry, I'm here. I just posted it in the chat. Does the distribution of funding, it says 74% for immediate shelter and supportive services and 26% for supportive and prevention services. Do that apply to each of our individual applications and grant funding as well? Or is that just the main 1.5 million is distributed like that?
It's the second. It's how the funding that we've received through the federal government will be distributed across the board, across our state. This is not particular. This is not how agencies or applicants need to budget out their program pieces. They don't need to say 75 will go to this and 26. You don't need to adhere to these percentages. It's just how we're going to disperse the funds across our state.
Wonderful. I have one more question. The VOCA funding was just cut, and we're wondering if family violence is thinking that the funding is also going to be cut. Do you know?
Carla?
So no, so we don't expect any cuts in family violence. And actually it did go up. We received a little bit more than we received last year this year. So the VOCA funding, we do expect that one to be cut. The rumor right now is at about approximately 40%. And so, yeah, so we really need to start thinking and brainstorming on how we're going to be doing our VOCA services here in the future. But for FVPSA and this NOFO, no funding cuts are expected at this time.
Can I ask, it's Colleen over at NUI, can I ask what the increase was for this year for family violence for you guys?
Elena, do you remember that number?
Yes, roundabout figure, don't quote me on the exact number, but it's about $200,000 and change.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Matthew, I saw that your question came up, and yes, dating violence is part of the funded FVPSA pieces. So yes, it qualifies.
And then can organizations focused on human trafficking apply for FVPSA?
That's the question of the millennial. We probably have to get clarified, Carla.
I was going to say the same thing. I think we need to reach out and ensure that
Yes.
those organizations can apply.
Yes. And it's not lost on us, the intimate partner component of a lot of human trafficking cases. So we'll look into it and we'll post the response. Mhm. Thank you for that question. And there was another question, I think, from Christina regarding retroactively reimbursing since the.
Christine Holbert answered in the chat, so thank
Okay.
you, though.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Excellent.
Okay, I think we have all the chat questions answered. Does anybody else have any additional questions? Okay, so, oh, will we be getting a copy of this recording for reference? Yes, I will upload it to YouTube this afternoon and send everyone the link. And as soon as we can get it posted to the website through our IT folks, it'll live where all the other training videos are on our website, and we'll let everyone know when it's live on the website as well. But I'll send out a link so that everyone has it as soon as it's on YouTube. And then the frequently asked questions, I will also request that those get posted. So probably by mid next week, those will the initial questions that we received today and the ones that I went through in the webinar will be posted for everyone to view those responses. And we will also, if additional questions come in, we'll get those posted as they come in as well, so that everyone has the same answers and knows what we have told everyone. Okay, and if that is the end of questions, our contact information is listed at the end of this presentation. We can also share the presentation slides with you all as well. So you have a copy of these. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Many of you know our great staff that we have, Christine, Tracy, and Sharon. So any questions that are received by anyone in the GMU for the NOFO will be posted, responses will be posted on our website. And so everyone will receive the question and the response in true time. We're not allowed to answer one by one questions with any organizations because we don't want to show preference and be very fair in this process for everyone. But my contact information and Elena's contact information are listed on the last slide. And then, of course, you can always email the NV victim services at dcfs.nv.gov at any time. And that one is an inbox that is monitored by all staff. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.